Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am thrilled because I have Jamey Stegmaier here on the Skype with me. Say hello, Jamey.
Hey Ed, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, little known fact, unless you backed Liftoff back in the day, Jamey and I actually knew each other pre-board games in Japan, a Japanese program in college called KCJS, right? Kyoto Center for Japanese Studies, right?
That's right, yeah.
And we were in the program, same year, same group. It should be known that he was in like top fifth, grade, top line class, and I was sort of in remedial Japanese.
I was mid-tier.
You were mid. Everyone above me was higher. I got pulled aside once, and he's like, "Why are you in this program?" McDonald, what was that guy's name? Is that right? McDonald's son? Is that?
Oh, I don't remember that. Yeah, I remember Fujiwara Sensei was my teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I knew you then, and we sort of hit cross paths when I was doing Liftoff, and you were the Kickstarter guru. But as part of this Q&A thing, I like to hear how everyone got into games and emerged into the space. And I don't know that everyone knows that story from you. So how did you go from studying Japanese in college and whatever else you were studying to the board game scene?
Well, one thing I want to bring up as we make that transition is we had a class together about the Tale of Genji.
Yes.
One of the classic Japanese novels. And we could pretty much do whatever we wanted as the assignment. And I chose to make a board game. I don't know, it wasn't very good. That was what I did. But I remember you actually being excited about it. I was really encouraged because you were one of the people who was excited that there was a game being made in the class.
Yeah, no, I thought it was awesome. At the time, I was more into video games, but games at all was super cool. I don't think I played it though. Did you have play sessions with it or play testing or anything like that?
This was before I knew that you had to actually play games to count them as being designed. I designed it in my head and I put it on paper, but I don't think anyone ever actually played it.
Well,
I kind of just showed it to the class.
There's got to be a huge opportunity for a historic Tale of Genji board game. I mean, I sort of think you should bring it back.
I don't know if that particular game would work, but I remember the story working pretty well. There's a good cast of characters and crazy stuff happens in the book.
And the Golden Child, right?
And the Golden.
But okay, so you had this. Was that the first board game you sort of designed, or had you been designing board games?
Yeah, I had designed. I'm fortunate. My parents exposed me to games from a pretty young age, so I was playing classic games like Monopoly and Risk, but also games that actually had some good choices in them. Not that those games don't, but games like Labyrinth, which I've heard is still a game.
Sure.
Scotland Yard, which I love. Have you played Scotland Yard?
I have. Those were on the list. Back to Bakersfield or whatever that one was also was a big one. I can't remember the name of it.
And so I was playing these games, and usually when I'd play one of the games, I would, even as a kid, I would design kind of my own version of it. And that happened through college, I guess, since I would, on and off, I would just randomly design a game. But then I took a break after college. After Tale of Genji, I don't think I designed a game for a long time just because I didn't see, I had fun doing it, but I didn't really have time to do something just for fun that I didn't see as having more potential than that.
Well, and what did you, you didn't go on to teach Japanese and be a Japanese scholar. No. What did you end up doing with your life before board games again?
Yeah, after college I worked for 4 years as a publishing project manager at a medical textbook company. So a book publishing company, which I learned a lot from project management, which I think you've done a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely. Too, right? And I think those are hugely valuable skills for all sorts of managing a team, schedules, budgets, all those things are being responsible and accountable for your job. All that stuff comes out of it, right?
Yeah. I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah, I learned a ton from that job.
You were in training, but okay, so you're doing that, and then what happens?
Well, I think it was probably near the end of my time at that job that I got back into games through Settlers of Catan and Agricola. And that really, the people I was playing with were just the great people. So it was people who I really liked who were inviting me into these games. And I was just excited to be around people who were excited to play games again.
Other people like games?
Yeah, it had been a while since I found fellow people like it was like me and my brother playing games when I grew up. I didn't know. I guess I played hearts and poker for a lot in college and after college, but not board games.
Right.
Had you played board games as like a young adult?
No, for me, it was always a lot of those classic board games we did as whether it was Trivial Pursuit or Clue or Monopoly or Scotland Yard or a few other random ones. We actually played board games when people like New Year's Eve was always like we played board games together, but they weren't. That was sort of the category, and hearts and spades and Scrabble and those types of games. And then, pretty much no until I was at Mind Control Software, which I worked at after Atari, but super nerdy group, right, of board game developers who were all in the scene. And that's when I started playing more games, but still then it was like, I don't know, Small World and like Settlers of Catan and Guillotine, and still sort of the edges of the scene, right?
Right.
And then it grew from there.
Yeah. When did you start getting on Board Game Geek on a regular basis? Do you remember that?
Probably, I want to say with Liftoff. I want to say I was sort of still, I think at one point I was buying a game and they're like, well, what's its Board Game Geek rating? And I was like, what? And maybe I looked up a rating, but it wasn't until, because at Mind Control, I started working on Murder of Crows with Tom Stenmark, the art director there, and he was big into that scene. But even then, I never really there was this transition for me, and I don't know how it, again, I'll find out from you as well, but the transition for me was up until Liftoff, board gaming was something I did with the people around me in my local community, some people at work, some friends, but I was had no engagement or part of any online community, any Facebook group, any conventions. I still played a lot of games and I had a game store I liked, but that sort of extending beyond, it wasn't until Liftoff that it was like, I have to be connected and engaged with that world, and then I really fell in love with it, and I grew from there. But that was really, doing the Kickstarter thing sort of forced me to engage. Yeah.
My answer is almost exactly the same, so I won't go into detail. But yeah, almost the exact same thing. I kind of regret it a little bit because I wish I had been a little bit more involved leading up to that point where I actually needed to be. But it's also kind of a good reminder to me that I'm sure there are people like me and you who are loving playing games right now, but that's all they do. They play games with their friends, and it never occurs to them to join those communities. And so...
Yeah, it's sort of the antithesis of what you'd expect, right?
Right.
And maybe things like Tabletopia will push it a little bit, but no, I think it's... and Board Game Geek, and they're improving it now, but it's not the most user-friendly website.
Yeah.
But the con scene's exploding, right? The con scene,
True.
Gen Con just sold out, but even outside of Gen Con, you have just cons all over the place, proto-spiels, better game stores, like the game stores that aren't dark, cluttered, and dirty, but they're bigger, they're open, the cafe. Yeah. I mean, it's really an amazing time.
Yeah, that's true. The game cafes in particular, I think, are a great addition. I bet they're making game stores better, and they're great communities and places. We have one in St. Louis now. Do you have any near where you are?
Yeah. There's Game Castle, which is the game store of the area, and there's a few others. But they just opened a location at Gamescom. I wouldn't call it a cafe, but they have a great, huge game. The proto-spiels are there. It's like a really great gaming space.
Nice.
But it's not quite at that cafe level. There's one that's, I think, opening in Berkeley. It's getting there. There's a lot of people who are pitching the idea. It's a little tough just because things are really expensive in the Bay Area. So, if you're going to do it, you got to, it's not like rent is some sort of cheap thing where you can try it out. You got to sort of really do it. But so you're getting back into the scene, and you start designing again because you're playing again. And, which is, I apologize, is it Viticulture, Tuscany Viticulture? Which one?
Viticulture is the base. Yeah, Viticulture was
the first one, right? Viticulture and Tuscany is on top of it. Okay, so Viticulture, that was your first Kickstarter, or was there one before that?
My first Kickstarter was for a book publishing company that I was involved with. Unrelated, yeah. Right. Well, I learned some stuff. I raised a grand total of $305 on that campaign. It's a big deal, but it was successfully funded because our goal was $300.
Hey, it's a way to start.
Yeah.
From small beginnings. That 300 ballooned quite a bit.
Right. And so I went from there. I think it was 2 years later. That was right after Kickstarter launched. And 2 years later, I put out Viticulture on Kickstarter in 2012.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not that long ago. I mean, that's 5 years ago.
Yeah, not at all.
And so that Kickstarter does well. You start building a community, and you do all these things. And I'm curious because I wasn't actually paying attention then. That was like pre me paying attention. But when did you start doing the blog share? Here's my experience piece. Was that in tandem with that? Did it come later? How did that start forming?
The blog started, I think it was a few months after that Kickstarter. So the Kickstarter went from August to October. It was a long one.
That is a long one.
Yeah, it was like 44 days, 44 days, which obviously I've not done since. I think you go for like 18 to 24 days?
Yeah, I'm at 24 days right now, and Legendary Creatures is up, but that's at 24.
Yeah, that seems like a good sweet spot, I think. 42 was way too long. But it was a few months after that, and I wanted to write something on my company blog, but I didn't want it to just be like design diary stuff. I enjoy design diaries. I'm doing them now on Facebook, but I didn't want it to only be that. Sure. So I was like, I've learned a lot. I've gone through this experience. Before I went through it, there were very few resources that helped me. So I was like, okay, I'll try to create a resource. I did not expect for it to be like, I don't even know how it's viewed now, but I think a lot of game creators at least read it. But I was just like, I've done a lot of dumb stuff. I want to put that out there to show people the dumb mistakes that I made so they don't have to make those same mistakes. That was like the original idea behind it.
Yeah, well, and fortunately there were some dumb mistakes, but then you quickly moved into smart decisions, right? And mistakes along the way.
Yeah, plenty of mistakes along the way, but yeah, some good insights, and at the very least, some good observations, because there are a lot of other creators, even back then, doing clever stuff. Like, I feel like I'm constantly following Michael Mendez at Tasty Minstrel Games. Yeah. His stuff for a long time, has been a little bit ahead of the pack. And here in St. Louis, we have the Sentinels of the Multiverse guys, Greater Than Games. And they were kind of at the forefront of the Kickstarter stuff as well. So I followed a lot of their stuff.
And that's been one of the things that's also been really exciting as the game industry's grown and changed, has been there's a lot of interesting sort of guerrilla tactic, marketing, campaign-y things, nifty ideas that you see and talk about in other industries, but haven't really been part of the traditional brick-and-mortar board game space. But now that you have that energy and that people and that opportunity coming into it, I just think you're seeing more of it. Like even the Raxon thing, right? With the sharing and the viral, you only get to have so much, get invited. Like, right. It's sort of corny, but it's a good example of interesting marketing. And I think Kickstarter really hijacked that a lot and got people doing it. And I think those people are filtering into companies now and bringing that energy with them.
Yeah, we even see companies like Portal. Right. Portal doesn't do Kickstarters, but whenever they do a pre-order now, it kind of acts like a Kickstarter. Like, they have stretch goals, they show how many backers and how much money they've raised. I think that's kind of neat when companies port that over to whatever experience they want to provide.
Yeah, no, it's been and seeing people on the social side of things and the marketing, it's just been really interesting as the game has grown. These other roles that, like when I worked at Disney, all these people exist, right? You just have this army of people doing it. But it's sort of emerging in the board game space, at least in the United States, and it's hard for me to judge how advanced things are in the European scene within Europe. But I really do feel like when you look at promotion and excitement and everything that's building in board games now, the quality's going through the roof, and it's huge, right?
Oh yeah.
I had to go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I don't know when the review's going to actually post, but I just played Yamatai. And it's interesting. Have you played it?
Yes, I have.
I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to exactly spoil the review, but there's a lot of it. It's like thoroughly and perfectly designed. Like every element of it works, and it all ties together. But there's a little bit about it where you're just like, sort of feels like the game I played 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's sort of it feels like the pinnacle of games, but a few years back. And it feels like a lot of them are much more dynamically pushing the edge. And I don't know if you had that experience, but I was sort of like, this is perfectly quaint in a weird way. I don't know if you had that experience or you loved it, but
I had my reaction. Mine was maybe a little bit more negative than that. I usually try to focus on my favorite mechanism, which was the turn order mechanism I really liked. But it was one of those games that, to me, was beautifully, like the art direction. You're all about art direction, right? The art direction is perfect, almost.
Right.
But it's essentially themeless. Like, it reminded me of Euro games of like 7 years ago, where they just didn't care about the theme at all. Just put a bunch of interesting mechanisms together, which is good, but now that we have so many games with interesting, compelling themes that mix well with the mechanisms, I think a game like that stands out as not having that element.
Perhaps you may find my actual review to align with what you just said even more closely. The other thing that was interesting about that mechanic, because we're off topic, but they have this incredible initiative mechanic where you're picking an ability and it's got a number and it drives you. But in a 3 or 4 player game, especially in a 4 player game, actually most of the time you don't have much of a choice.
Right.
So it ends up not being it's sort of sidelined in a way that minimizes it. You're sort of like, well, there's only 2 things left. I'm not really, and they have like 14 spots, but you're only 4 people choosing from 5 options. You're not gonna really. I found by the time I was looking at the decision, it wasn't as powerful as trying to do something else on the board. But anyway, but games are flying forward, and so I mean, I think this is known. You mentioned it, obviously. On your blog, you have tons and tons of Kickstarter information. So I didn't want to deep dive and ask you a bunch about Kickstarter stuff because I just feel like that information's available.
Yeah.
And I read your blog, and you always have a lot of guests on it and things like that. But the thing that I've been most interested in your story right now and watching it from the picture that you provide of it, so to a degree watching it, has been you transitioning away from Kickstarter. Like, that was the most interesting thing, right? And some of that's baked into what happened with Scythe, and some of that's baked into just you growing as a business. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about just specifically to that, like if small Kickstarter publisher, a couple games, 3 games, 4 or 5 games, looking to say, I want to make this jump. I mean, Grant, he tried to do it really quickly, and he had a challenge doing it. But what are some of the particular things you've learned on that angle, or from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it was maybe a month or so ago that I wrote a blog post about this, because my last Kickstarter was in 2015, late 2015 for Scythe, and I haven't done one since. But I kind of officially announced, I don't know why I did it, but I just had stuff to write about. And I announced it about in November of 2016, last year, that I was pretty much done using Kickstarter. And I started learning stuff right away. Like, one of the things I learned was, because basically I'm just selling to distributors now. And so I'm still trying to foster a community of fans and potential fans and people who just have questions about our games. Like, foster that, but really the people I'm selling to it's like 10 people, like 10 distributors.
Sure.
And then any international partners that I have for localized versions.
Right.
So instead of selling to thousands of people now, I'm selling to a very small number, but I'm trying to sell a lot of product to each of them. So it's a very different tactic, and I have to, it's a fairly competitive space between a lot of those people, especially the distributors. They all want to be treated, as anyone does, they want to be treated equally and well. And so one of the things that I learned right away was about release dates. I never used release dates in the past. So I just figured when a game arrives at a store in Oakland or San Francisco, go ahead and release it. Like, you don't have to wait for a certain day to release it. And if a game arrives a little bit later in Atlanta, that's okay, even though it's a new product. And that made it. I tried that with Invaders from Afar, the Scythe expansion, and I got a lot of kind of a hate from distributors and retailers who didn't like that. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you experienced?
No, I know what you're talking about actually from the video game side. I haven't.
Okay.
I'm with Herbaceous. It's the first game that I've had that actually has sold a small volume compared to you, but a large volume to any of my other stuff, and has had a reprint. And so part of it for me has been starting that courtship myself and starting that engagement with distributors and having
Yeah.
those conversations. I'm getting more familiar with it. But certainly on the video game side, that kind of release date, retailer management, not wanting anyone to get that leg up. And it's so weird because it's like I understand maybe online retailers, but there's like zero impact to a store in Virginia if a store in Texas gets a game a day before them, right? Like, whereas Kickstarters and other things that are online, that date could be really aggressive. But in that sort of store-to-store way, it doesn't really make sense. The online competition is through the roof, though, and that's really what is impacting distributors and retailers a lot. So I think that's where the sensitivity is nowadays. But again, I haven't been dealing with them as long or in the ways that you have.
Well, it's still fresh for me too. I mean, Invaders was our first new release because the distributors and retailers don't seem to care as much about reprints in terms of release dates. They care about the reprints themselves, not the firm date. Charterstone will be the first completely new game, and I already have people asking me for a release date for it, but I won't know it until it ships from China at best, because there's a lot that happens between now and when it actually ships. It would be hard for me to predict a date that far in advance. But I'll see how that goes. Because Charterstone is kind of a worldwide release, and so I'm trying to juggle, like, do I use the same date worldwide, or do I know that Europe is just going to be a few weeks later and that's okay? So
and those are things I think, as if you spend some time, and I'm sure you've already, but talking with some of the people who work at the Asmodees and the larger organizations, Yellow can give you some perspective. I think at some point you move away from that creator, smaller publisher wanting to manage and worried about the risks, to larger publisher mentalities like, no, we're just going to call the date, and then we're going to grind it out, and we're going to make decisions to make it happen, or we're going to miss it, but we're not going to like roll it to the end because we're going to start the marketing train. But that, you got to really be comfortable doing that, right? You got to have that belt of experience.
Well, I've been doing that. That's kind of like over the last few months. I did that backwards planning for a holiday release. Even though I don't know the exact date, I knew that I wanted to get these games in by early November. And so as early as May, I'm organizing orders from distributors and things like that for games that won't be released till November. So that's very new to think like that far ahead, and to have deadlines now that seem so urgent. Because they'll have an impact 5 months later.
Yeah, it's then your project and program managing coming through, getting back into it. And I seem to, one of the other things I remember, you had some cash flow issues, right? And if anything you don't want to talk about, let me know. You're pretty transparent. But because, when I looked at it, I was like, well, that's what happens when you don't pre-sell up front, $1 million of product, and you just sort of finance it, right? So could you speak to that a little bit? We just had to do end taxes and things like that. I mean, what were some of the, because it was just, you went from that front end business to the back end business, and what happened?
So I didn't anticipate having cash flow issues, because Scythe has sold really well for us. Viticulture continues to sell really well. Between Two Cities does. Euphoria is probably the slowest one, but all these games are selling pretty well. But then I get hit with, we had a very profitable year last year, and so I got hit with a big tax payment that I hadn't estimated for in advance. This year I'm doing like quarterly tax estimates, so even though I'll be paying a lot of taxes, I hope if I'm profitable again this year, it'll be spread out. But basically, in March, I got a big bill from the government where it went from one day looking like our bank account was really healthy to it just decimated. We just barely had enough to cover the amount I had to pay to the IRS. So that was kind of a shock. And then we started to get more money back again from another print run of Scythe and Viticulture. But to fund, for this holiday print run that I was gearing up to make, we're making, across all SKUs, we're making about 200,000 units of different games and products, which is a lot. It's optimistic, but I got early estimates from distributors who wanted those games, but I don't have enough cash to fund all of that. So I did something different for me, which was I went to the distributors and I said, I would love to make all this stuff for you so you can sell it. And I'd love to guarantee that I can make this for you so it doesn't get allocated. So if a distributor wants 3,000 copies, they know that they're getting 3,000 instead of being allocated down to like 500 if I make a smaller print run. But I said I asked them to basically to pay in advance if they wanted to guarantee it, and I gave them a little bit of a discount if they did pay in advance. So the distributors ended up being my backers essentially for this holiday print run, which was really helpful. I don't know if they'll do that again. I think it kind of depends on how Charterstone sells.
I think it's happening more. I mean, through other channels, I've heard a lot more of, because Kickstarter creators are slammed by that, and they're like, on one of these games that's a hit, and they're like, hey, could you give us 20,000 copies? And a Kickstarter's crazy. I don't have 40 grand. Like, I can't just manage 50 grand. Like, what are you talking? And so there are these conversations, like 50%, or if you want to secure it, or with a discount. Yeah. And, again, a lot of it comes down to business sense and relationship and trust and all those things that you build as you go. But I remember after reading your blog post about the tax thing, I still work with Justin, and I was like, hey, let's talk about taxes a little bit. I think I'm okay. I haven't been generating that much profit, but just, it's good to be on the up and up there.
Yeah.
And so you there's sort of been this relation. So, like, just to break it down, you talked a little bit about relationship with distributors. You've talked a little bit about finances. As a creator designer, maybe sourcing other work from other designers, like, has that aspect of a publisher changed off Kickstarter, or does that part of the business, sort of the sourcing and making of the games, is that about the same, or has that changed at all?
It has evolved. I'm not sure if it's related to Kickstarter or just related to, I think there are a variety of factors. So for just a few quick hits, we Between Two Cities is the first game that we have designed by someone else, and that came out a few years ago.
And you have, I don't know that this video is going to go off, but like tomorrow or sometime soon you have the expansion coming out, right? Or Capital City?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning.
Hey, look at her.
Tomorrow is the release date for that. I love working with Ben and Matthew on this game. Last year we signed another game that we haven't really announced yet, but there's a designer who submitted to us, and we loved her game, and so I've been developing that. And I really enjoy the development process. Yeah. You've done that for a couple games, right? Served as more of a developer. For games.
I mean it's more and more that for me. I'm a little bit different in that, and I don't know how long it'll be this way, but it's a little bit more on the video game project approach, where like sort of the project lead and everyone's working together. Like, I'm just used to designers being a part of the team with graphic designers and artists. So most games today still is, I usually approach a designer that I like or want to work with or engage with, and I have like a brief. It's like, hey, here's this game I want to make with these sort of things and these elements, and it sort of wants to fit this place, and this is the idea. What do you think? Is that interesting? And then they work on it. I haven't actually done solicited, but I haven't actually done like, here's a design. I saw that design, and I'm going to take that design and do something with it. In a way, oddly, Herbaceous was sort of that way, because I saw Beth's art.
Yeah.
And I was like, that has to be a game. Yeah. How can I secure that art? Work that out with Beth. And then I was like, well, now I need to find the other pieces. And that's when I went and found Steve and Keith and built it together. But I haven't taken like a pen and paper, prototype and actually been like, okay, let's build around that. That wasn't something I had sort of started already. But maybe, that might come. I don't know. But it sounds like the ones you're talking about were submitted designs, or this one that you mentioned.
Yeah, these were submitted, but I'm kind of fascinated by that process that you just described. We've done that a little bit with the Euphoria expansion, which has taken much longer than we thought. Basically, I went to Morten, our part-time employee in Denmark, and I said, I put all the ideas that I have into the original Euphoria. I don't know how to design an expansion for it myself. If you want to give it a try, I will support that. And so he did. But I didn't manage it all that well, because we went too long in between him working on it and me actually reviewing what he was working on it, and it got farther away from what I thought was good for Euphoria. And by the time we realized that, he had put so much time and resources into it that when I came back to him and said, "Hey, this isn't what I was looking for," that it was a tough conversation. And so I kind of learned that we need to stay. If I do that in the future, I'm sure you can give me some tips here, but I need to stay much more closer in touch with him along the way, or whoever I'm working with.
You really do. It's something. It's a cool way to work, perhaps, but it's something you need to do. And you also need to know how to back away. And I was working on Vineyard with Luke Laurie, and I had. It was an interesting conversation because I was like, what I don't want is a worker placement game. Yeah, there's a guy out there making fantastic wine worker placement games, and I don't want anything like that. I don't want a game that's more than 45 minutes. Like I just want to stay away from that.
Right.
And at the time, he was like deep in Energy Empire and like really carving out like this Euro worker placement interesting thing.
Yeah.
And like he kept being like, well, what about this worker placement? I'm like, that's sort of worker placement. And so we had the conversation a few times, and I was like, look, man, we've done well. Let's work out this thing, but we do lots of there's no reason our relationship should suffer because there's a zone of games you want that's not this, and let's like not worry about it. And he was cool with it. But you got to sort of like pay attention to that, because if people get too leveraged or too out of sync, it can be tough. And you've even started licensing, right? Like Leaders of Euphoria, I think it's somewhere over there, was... And he sent me the deluxe edition with a giant... have you seen that thing with the...
I've got one on my shelf.
Mega...
Awesome.
But that was somebody else using one of your IPs and extending it. I mean, and presumably that went well, I would hope. I don't know.
That was an interesting journey, because for a while we were... Like I think I originally went to Brian at Overworld and I said, I know you're really good at large group games. I would love for there to be a large group game in the world of Euphoria, maybe Good Cop, Bad Cop in Euphoria. And so for a while, he was designing it with the intent of us publishing it. But it got to the point where I realized that A, I loved the game, but B, it didn't fit into the Stonemaier brand anymore, like what the brand had become. And so we flipped it around and he licensed Euphoria to publish it under his name. And we kind of supported it, and I'll continue to tell people about it because I love it.
And man, I think we could have another half-hour chat on brand alone. That's always a cool conversation. But I've been trying to keep these to about 20, 25. We're at like almost 30. Yeah, I think we've had a good long chat. Thanks for the time, man. I mean, I find it fascinating. I hope people who watch do as well. But I think the fact that the game community of publishers and distributors and everyone is so willing to talk to each other and engage on how's it going as a business, what makes sense, what doesn't, I think is part of what's helping drive quality in what we're doing. So I really appreciate your openness, man.
My pleasure. And I'm loving, I think I've told you this privately, but I'm loving your videos where someone posts an interesting article or video and you do a response soon after that with a really interesting take. Sure. I hope you keep doing those, and I really, really enjoy those.
I appreciate it. Those are interesting, just in that like they sort of happen when they happen, right? They're harder to schedule. Right. No, I love it. I've been trying. There's been things I've had opinions of, though. I've tried not to get into the punditry if I don't have a unique perspective to add. Yeah. And so that is a little limiting to sure. But I really enjoy I feel like there's a gap in media right now this has been a long election and U.S. government period. And during this period, I've watched a lot of news of all sorts. And there's all this category of news that you just never see. And it was sort of watching that, it was like, hey, there should be some of that. So that's sort of what drove it, but I appreciate that, and I certainly I have no harm sharing when I have something good to say. But so again, thanks for being on. I hope sometime in the future we'll have you again, and we'll see. And hopefully, if anyone wants other questions or a follow up, let us know.
Yep, sounds great.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Take care.
All right, so let me do this. So here's the moment.